Mr. President, I rise today to voice my support for the resolution we're talking about on public safety in Washington, D.C. The D.C. Revised Criminal Code Act is another example of how the far left is so out of touch that they want to reduce penalties for violent crime in D.C. while residents, federal employees, members of Congress, our visiting constituents, and even our visiting diplomats are facing greater risk. There are a number of concerns I have with the crime bill that the D.C. Council passed over the objections of the D.C. mayor, many of which have already been discussed at length by my colleagues. But one of the most puzzling to me is why you would ever reduce penalties for carjacking. D.C. city officials saw in 2019, from 2019 to 2020, the number of carjackings in D.C. more than doubled, from 152 to 360. They're not following trends either. In 2021, it went up to 425, and in 2022, it went up to 485. Despite the fact that carjackings have more than tripled in the last 4 years, far-left radicals on the D.C. City Council thought now was time to reduce penalties for carjacking. That's one of only several examples that we can go to that my colleagues have talked about. That tells me that the D.C. City Council is blind to crime happening right in front of them, right outside their front door, or that the carjacking industry has some really good lobbyists here in Washington. Now, to make it worse, only a month ago, President Biden's Office of Management and Budget issued a statement opposing this resolution and in support of letting radical D.C. activists on the council let the bill go into effect. Not only that, but at least on 2 occasions, President Biden's U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C. expressed support for letting the radical proposal proceed, even while raising concerns about how extreme the policies were. I'm appealing directly to President Biden. First, I want to thank him for agreeing to sign this resolution when we sent it to the President's desk after a successful vote. But I'm also asking the President to prove his commitment to public safety by working with my colleagues and me on common sense, bipartisan proposals that keep communities safe. I think that I have a track record of bipartisanship here that the President should take as a good faith offer. We need to get to work. One of the bills that I'd like to get support for is a bill that I filed last Congress, I'm going to file again, called the Protect and Serve Act. We need to get it into law because it creates penalties for those who assault or kill a police officer, the brave men and women in law enforcement. We need to show our commitment to law enforcement and to law and order in this country. And I believe the Protect and Serve Act will send a clear signal to friends and foes alike that we care about law enforcement. We need the thousands of law enforcement jobs that are not being filled today because law enforcement feels like, at least policymakers, I don't believe the American people, are working against them. But now I also want to talk a little bit about how crime's getting worse. And Mr. President, I consider you a friend. You're on the other side of the aisle, but I see us having a lot in common. But Mr. President, I have to tell you, for those of you watching this speech, my mother and maybe a few others, I think it's important to understand how campaign finance works here. Both the Republicans and Democrats have national organizations that work on supporting candidates. I think that that's fine. Here's what I don't think is fine. It's actually something that I just made sure the subpage is still up. It is. I can't lift my phone and show you all. It's a violation of the Senate rules. But if you Google Act Blue and all cops are bastards, you will go to a fundraising webpage on Act Blue, the very same engine that my Democratic colleagues use for fundraising. I know most of my Democratic colleagues do not embrace that as anything that they would support or contribute to, but it's out there. If you go to their website, you're going to see the 13.12-mile run And they go on to explain why they specifically picked that distance. Because 1312 translates into ACAB. And do you know what ACAB translates into? All cops are bastards. All. We know that in any area where you have tens of thousands of people, not all of them are angels, but all of them? Our law enforcement folks here on Capitol Hill, all of them, the ones that protected us on January the 6th, they're raising money to convince people that all cops are bastards. It'd be interesting to see if anybody on the city council in D.C. has actually provided a contribution. Now, more recently, I think that this sort of rhetoric is at least in part what occurred in Atlanta just about a week ago, where violent activists attacked a construction site for Atlanta public safety training. At least 23 of the agitators were arrested and charged with domestic terrorism after conducting what the Atlanta Police Department is calling, in quotes, a coordinated attack on construction equipment and police officers. Now, here's what's ironic about that. I've been to several police officer training facilities. And you know what they train there? Well, they train them to protect themselves and protect innocent victims, but they also train them how to de-escalate. They train them how to take a dangerous situation and let someone who may be a criminal able to go and face justice, but not die at a crime scene. They're teaching police officers to be better. And in Atlanta, because of this sort of rhetoric, they're attacking the very people that we all want to see at our doorstep when we dial 911. The violent activists destroyed multiple pieces of construction equipment. Thankfully, no police officers were harmed. These are not your run-of-the-mill defend the police activists. These are radicals, like the radicals who are raising money on it, who are willing to use violence to achieve their ends of abolishing the police. This D.C. crime bill that we're going to overturn today is another step in that direction, enabling and encouraging unsafe communities at the expense of the vast majority of police officers and citizens who simply want to live in peace. It's long past time for the federal government to say enough is enough when it comes to crime in this country. I was proud to join President Trump in supporting the First Step Act, by the way. If you want to talk to me about criminal justice reform, if you want to talk to me about reducing sentences for nonviolent offenders, if you want to talk to me about early release of those who look like they have an opportunity to reform and get back and be active members of society, count me in. You know why? Because I've already done it. I've done it at the state level and I've done it up here. That is smart criminal justice policy. This is dangerous. So, Mr. President, I want to thank my friend and colleague from a one-time home of mine in Tennessee for moving this resolution. You should be congratulated. You've done great work, and I think you've opened the eyes of several members on the other side of the aisle here to why this is a sound bill, and I'm glad to see you carry it all the way to the President's desk and us be successful. So thank you, Senator Hagerty. But let's not end with this vote. Go out to that website and see what we're up against. Talk to your local law enforcement and talk about how many unfilled positions there are and how morale is low. And do your part to thank every man and woman in uniform for their service. Thank you, Mr. President.